The city stretched before him, alive with lights that blinked like restless stars, each one a reminder of his reach and influence. From the top floor of the tallest tower, Adrian Cross stood framed against the glass, his reflection merging with the glittering skyline. To the world, this was the image of triumph, a man who had conquered every obstacle, a man who held power in the palm of his hand. But even as he surveyed the empire below, his lips parted to whisper a question that never left him. What if she never returned? Those 6 words were not spoken for the city, nor for the colleagues who praised him. They were spoken to the silence that shadowed him no matter how loud the applause, no matter how many victories were written in his name. Have you ever reached for a dream so desperately that you lost sight of the hands reaching for you? Have you ever chased achievement so relentlessly that the very people who once cheered for you grew tired, faded, and walked away? Adrian had. And now, at the pinnacle of all he thought he wanted, he was left staring into glass and steel with an emptiness that no amount of success could ever fill. Yes, the headlines crowned him a genius. Yes, investors trusted him like a prophet. Yes, the world believed he had everything. But the man inside the tailored suit knew the truth. He had won the world and lost his home. There is a loneliness that comes not from being unknown, but from being celebrated by everyone except the ones who matter most. That was Adrian's reality. The laughter of his daughter no longer filled his evenings. The woman who once believed in him more than he believed in himself had long since carried her love and their child away. And so he stood there, night after night, gazing out at the glittering horizon, haunted by the thought, what if she never came back? Before we step deeper into this story, let me ask you, what do you value most in life? Is it wealth, recognition, power? Or is it the warmth of family, the bond of love, the moments money cannot buy? If you believe family and love outweigh money and ambition, do me a favor, tap that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you hold dearest. Your words matter here, because tonight, as we open the story of Adrian Cross, you'll see a man who discovered too late that the very foundation of his life was not built in boardrooms or contracts, but in the hearts of the 2 people he took for granted. This is not just his story, it is a warning, a mirror, and a chance for us to pause and ask, what does it mean to gain everything, yet lose the one thing you cannot replace? The question never left him. It followed him into boardrooms, echoed during speeches, lingered when the applause faded. What if she never returned? The truth was simple, yet merciless. Adrian had everything the world respected, and nothing his heart longed for. The skyscraper where he stood was his crown, but it was also his prison. The very walls that showcased his glory now reflected his emptiness back at him. Have you ever sat in a room full of people, smiling, laughing, being praised, yet felt more alone than if you were stranded on an island? That was Adrian's life. Crowds admired him, colleagues bowed to him, strangers envied him. But at the end of every night, when the lights dimmed and the city softened to a low hum, he was left with silence. Not peace, silence. He remembered her, Selena, the woman who once shared in his small victories before the world even knew his name. She had believed in him, even when he doubted himself. She had carried their daughter, Claire, into his arms, reminding him that his life was never meant to be lived for ambition alone. But somewhere along the climb, he forgot. Forgotten anniversaries, broken promises, too many nights choosing contracts over conversations. Even when he was physically present, his mind was elsewhere, on deals, expansion, influence. Until the day she walked away, her hand wrapped around Claire, her voice, steady with disappointment that cut deeper than any enemy could wound. And now, years later, the question returned each night like a ghost at his shoulder. What if she never came back? What if he lived and died as the man who built empires but lost the only people who made him human? It was the kind of regret that no award could erase, no fortune could silence, no achievement could redeem. And that's why this story matters, because it's not just about Adrian. It's about all of us. How often do we chase the approval of the world while neglecting the voices at home? How often do we promise ourselves that one day we'll slow down, that one day I'll give time to the ones we love, only to discover that one day comes too late? This story will challenge you to look at your own reflection and ask, what am I building? And who am I building it for? Because Adrian Cross had to learn the hardest truth of all, success without love is failure in disguise. And if Selena had never returned, his legacy would have been written in headlines, but erased in the hearts of those who mattered most. As we walk with him through the highs and lows of this journey, remember this: every choice has a cost, every ambition carries a trade, and sometimes the price is far greater than we realize. So lean in. Stay with me. This isn't just the story of a CEO. This is the story of a man who gained everything, only to discover that without love, he had nothing. And perhaps, in his biggest regret, you might find the greatest lesson for your own life. The roar of applause still rang in his ears. The stage lights had faded, but their glare lingered in his vision like burning ghosts. Hours earlier, Adrian Cross had been hailed as a titan. An audience of thousands had risen to their feet, clapping until their palms stung, chanting his name as if he were more than a man, as if he were an idea. Now, in the back of his sleek car, silence swallowed him whole. No chants, no cheers, only the sound of his own breathing. At the banquet, they had called him unstoppable. They listed his victories as if they were scripture: companies built, industries conquered, innovations that reshaped the market. On the podium, with cameras flashing, Adrian had nodded with practiced humility, delivering sharp words about vision and determination. To the world, he looked untouchable, the man who had it all. But as the car carried him higher into the city's wealthy district, a different truth settled over him. He had everything and nothing at the same time. When the elevator opened into his penthouse, the contrast cut deep. Hours earlier, hundreds of people raised glasses in his honor. Now, the only thing that greeted him was silence. His penthouse was vast, pristine, every surface polished, a work of art in glass and steel. But where others might see beauty, Adrian felt absence. The walls displayed awards, framed articles, and photographs from ceremonies across the globe. Yet nowhere in that vast gallery was a family portrait. No snapshots of a daughter laughing on a playground. No candid photo of a woman leaning against his shoulder. Just glossy achievements, reminders of the empire he had built and the love he had destroyed. He loosened his tie, poured a glass of scotch, and stepped toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The skyline glittered back at him like a crown, a view that people would kill to own. But as Adrian looked at the reflection in the glass, his own face staring back at him, he saw not a king, but a prisoner. Because the truth was merciless. When the world clapped, he was celebrated. But when the clapping stopped, he was utterly, unbearably alone. He whispered into the silence, the same words that haunted him every night. What if she never returned? The question hit harder than any headline, any financial loss, any failed deal. It was the one wound he could never close. Because Adrian Cross, the man they hailed as unstoppable, knew there was one thing he could never buy back: the life he had once had with Selena and Claire. And without them, all the applause in the world meant nothing. The city stretched beneath him like a jewel, but Adrian couldn't feel its glow. He had stood in rooms where presidents shook his hand, where billionaires leaned in to hear his thoughts. He had signed contracts worth more than the annual budgets of small nations. His signature alone could shift markets. Yet standing alone in his penthouse, drink in hand, none of it mattered. What good were the headlines when the people he longed for weren't reading them? What good were the speeches when the voice he wanted most to hear, the soft voice that once whispered, "I believe in you," was gone? The emptiness wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was steady, suffocating, the kind of silence that pressed in on him even when the city roared outside. He had learned to wear a mask in public, the grin, the handshake, the powerful stride. But in private, the mask cracked. He remembered the first time a magazine cover had named him the Man of the Year. He had brought the issue home, excited to share it. Selena smiled politely, but her eyes told the truth. She was proud of him, yes, but she was lonely. Their daughter Claire had tugged on his sleeve that evening, asking him to play. He promised he would. He never did. That promise had joined a long line of others, broken and forgotten in the rush to be admired by strangers. Now, every award on his wall mocked him. They weren't reminders of greatness. They were gravestones of time he could never reclaim. Each plaque whispered, "You won us, but you lost them." Adrian's reflection in the window stared back with eyes that no longer held fire, only shadows. The man the world adored was not the man standing here tonight. That man was weary, stripped bare by the truth he could never escape. He sank into the leather chair by his desk, surrounded by mahogany and glass, symbols of triumph that felt more like chains. He thought of Selena's laughter, the way Claire's small hand once fit inside his. These memories weren't warm anymore. They were knives. The cruel irony was that the more the world celebrated him, the deeper the ache grew. Applause filled stadiums, but his own home remained silent. Fans wanted autographs. His daughter didn't want his presence. His face appeared on magazine covers, yet it was absent from the only photo albums that mattered. And so the question came again, softer this time but sharper than ever. What if she never returned? Would his empire be remembered as brilliance, or would history remember him as the man who lost everything worth keeping? Before I go further, let me turn the question to you. Would you trade love for success? Would you give up the embrace of family for the applause of the world? Comment below. Your answers might surprise you. Because for Adrian, that trade was no longer hypothetical. It was the choice he had made, and the price he was still paying. He had believed there would always be time to make it right. That success could be the apology. That building a future would somehow heal the damage done to the past. But now, all the time he thought he had was gone, replaced by empty days filled with meetings and nights that ended in silence. He didn't know the last story Claire had written for school. Didn't know what music she liked, or if she still doodled in the margins of her notebooks like she used to. He didn't know if Selena had found someone else, someone who held her hand when she was tired, someone who noticed the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, someone who didn't put her second. The man who once swore to protect them didn't even know the sound of their voices anymore. His phone rang, his assistant's name glowing on the screen. A late request from a partner in Singapore. Adrian declined the call. For a moment, he just sat there, phone in hand, unmoving. He scrolled through his contacts, paused over the one name that mattered. Selena. No heart emoji, no nickname, just her name, plain and distant. A number he hadn't dialed in months, a number he was afraid might not answer. He didn't press it. Instead, he stared at it, thumb hovering. Thinking. Across the room, near the entryway, sat a box he hadn't opened in years. It had arrived shortly after they left, addressed to him in Selena's handwriting. Inside were old drawings Claire had made. A few pictures. A note. He hadn't read the note the day it came. Couldn't. He had placed the box near the coat rack, convinced he would open it when he was ready. He never was. Until now. Adrian stood, his steps slower than usual. He walked across the marble floor, that cold, perfect floor, and crouched beside the box. His hand hovered over it like it was a wound he had forgotten how to touch. He opened the lid. There, on top, was a photo, Selena and Claire, smiling on a sunlit afternoon. Claire had a crayon in her hand. Her dress was stained with paint. Her face beamed with joy. He felt something move in his chest, tight, almost painful. He reached in and picked up the folded note. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. He hesitated, then unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. You built the life you wanted. We just weren't part of it anymore. No bitterness, no accusations, just truth. Quiet and final. He sat there for a long time, the note trembling in his hands. Because in that moment, it became clear Adrian Cross wasn't haunted by what he had lost. He was haunted by what he hadn't fought for. And now, alone in the silence he had created, the man who had everything realized he might already be too late. Before the suits, before the towers, before the titles, there was a one-bedroom apartment with creaky floors, a dripping faucet, and a window that barely opened. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Adrian used to joke that the place could fit into the lobby of his future office building. Selena would roll her eyes, then toss a cushion at him, smirking as she said, "Just make sure you don't forget what this place feels like once you get there." He promised he wouldn't. That apartment saw everything. Late nights filled with hope and exhaustion. Takeout containers piled high on the table. Dreams scribbled on napkins and whiteboards, drawn out with red eyes and burning hearts. Adrian had a desk wedged between the kitchen and the living room. It was more of a folding table than a real desk, but it was where ideas were born, product, concepts, funding pitches, business names scratched out and rewritten a dozen times. Selena always brought him coffee. Always, even when she was tired, even when he didn't ask. She'd wordlessly place the mug beside his laptop, then sit nearby, legs tucked under her, reading or sketching or humming something soft. They didn't have much, but their life back then was full. Full of noise, full of hope, full of them. Adrian often worked until dawn. But no matter how late it was, Selena would stay up until he finally closed the laptop and joined her on the couch. Some nights they talked about the future like it was a storybook waiting to be written. Other nights they just held each other, saying nothing, and that was enough. The fridge leaked. The oven took forever to heat. They didn't have cable, and the Wi-Fi cut out whenever it rained, but they laughed. God, they laughed. At the broken heater, at each other, at nothing. They had routines. Saturday mornings at the corner diner. Afternoon walks in the park with a shared smoothie. Cheap wine on Friday nights, dancing barefoot in their tiny kitchen to music from a dusty radio. And when the power went out, which it did more than once, they lit candles and played 20 questions like kids at a sleepover. In those moments, Adrian didn't feel poor. He felt rich in ways he wouldn't understand until much later. Selena used to say, "Love doesn't wait for the right circumstances. It shows up in the struggle." And it did. Every single day. The night Claire was born, nothing else mattered. The world outside their tiny apartment blurred into silence. No meetings, no deadlines, no business plans. Just a hospital room filled with the rhythm of new life and the raw, terrifying beauty of becoming something more than just two people in love. Adrian had never been more afraid, or more certain. He held Selena's hand through every breath, her knuckles white, her voice hoarse, but steady. She didn't yell, didn't panic. She endured. And when the cry finally came, sharp, small, and sacred, Adrian felt the entire axis of his world shift. The nurse placed the child in his arms, wrapped in soft blankets, eyes blinking slowly beneath a layer of innocence untouched by the world. He looked at Selena, her hair damp, her eyes tired and shining. "She's perfect," she whispered. Adrian nodded, voice caught in his throat. His hands trembled as he stared down at his daughter's face, so small, so delicate. It was the first time in his life he had ever felt completely unprepared. But it was also the first time he knew, without question, what his purpose was. In that quiet, fluorescent-lit room, with machines humming softly around them, he made a vow. Not out loud, not yet, but deep inside, where real promises are made. He would protect her, provide for her, never let her go without love. He kissed Claire's forehead and whispered, "You'll never have to wonder if you're enough." Selena leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Even if we mess up along the way." Adrian smiled. "As long as we don't give up." Those first few weeks were chaos and wonder tangled together. Sleepless nights, diaper changes at 3 a.m., bottles warmed in the dark. But none of it felt like a burden. Adrian began to understand love in a way business never taught him. It wasn't about solving problems or optimizing outcomes. It was about showing up, every moment, even when there was nothing to say and everything to feel. He'd rock Claire in his arms and whisper business ideas to her like bedtime stories. Selena would laugh and say he was trying to raise a CEO from the crib. But even as she teased, her eyes would soften, because she saw the change in him. He wasn't chasing just for himself anymore. When Adrian looked at his daughter, he didn't see pressure. He saw purpose. Every plan he made now had her at the center of it. But even in those early golden days, small cracks began to form. Cracks not in their love, but in their rhythm. He started taking more calls at night, missing a few feedings, promising to be home in 10 minutes that stretched into hours. Selena noticed. She didn't say much, not at first, but her smiles became shorter. Her eyes lingered on him longer when he walked in late, bottle in hand, apology ready. She never accused him, never blamed. She just began to wonder, quietly alone, whether ambition could love her back. There wasn't a single moment when things fell apart. No shouting match, no betrayal, no dramatic exit. Just the slow drift that happens when love goes unheard for too long. Adrian's hours began to stretch. First, because he needed to prove himself. Then because he needed to expand. Then because he convinced himself the sacrifices were for them. He missed dinners, then weekends, then the occasional milestone. Not because he didn't care, but because he believed he had time. Always time. Selena carried the weight in silence. She took care of Claire, the bills, the late-night feedings when Adrian was too exhausted, or simply not there. She still smiled when he came home, still asked about his day, still kissed him goodnight. But he didn't notice how often she stopped talking halfway through a sentence, realizing he wasn't really listening. He didn't notice how she started falling asleep with her back to him, arms folded instead of open. He didn't see the loneliness forming in her, not the kind that screams, but the kind that learns to stay quiet. And Selena wasn't the type to beg for attention. She had always been strong. She didn't fall in love with Adrian because he promised her luxury. She loved him because he once looked at her like she was the only reason he existed. But that look came less and less. One evening, while feeding Claire in her high chair, Selina glanced up to find Adrian on a call again, pacing the hallway, voice sharp with urgency. He caught her eye for half a second and turned away. That moment stayed with her. After Claire was tucked in, she sat on the couch and waited for him to return. He didn't. He'd gone back to the office, chasing a deal he said could change everything. The next morning, she woke up alone. She found a note on the table, his familiar handwriting scribbled across it. Didn't want to wake you. I'll make it up to you both this weekend. I promise. She folded it and placed it in a drawer already full of other promises. Later that day, she took Claire to the park. Just the two of them. There, on a bench shaded by trees, she watched her daughter run through the grass, laughing at butterflies, chasing sunlight. Selina smiled and felt something else stir beneath it. Not anger, not even disappointment, resignation. She missed him. But she missed the man he used to be more than the one who still came home. Adrian never noticed the drawer where she kept his notes. He never knew that Selina had started journaling again, filling pages with questions she didn't want to ask out loud. And he never once asked her, "Are you happy?" Not because he didn't care, but because he assumed she was. And that was the beginning. Not of the end, not yet, but of the pause in their love. The kind of pause that grows when one person keeps building and the other keeps waiting. A pause that one day would become a door quietly closing. Time didn't stop. It simply drifted forward, carrying with it the small moments Adrian never noticed until they had passed. Claire's first day of preschool came and went. Selina took pictures on her phone, holding their daughter's hand as she stepped through the school gate with her little backpack and oversized shoes. Adrian had promised he'd be there, said he'd rearrange his schedule. But that morning, a crisis with overseas investors pulled him into an early meeting. He sent a text that said, "I'm sorry. I'll make the next one." There were too many next ones that never came. Claire's dance recital, her 5th birthday, a school art fair where she won 2nd place and waited by the door, scanning the crowd for a face that never arrived. Each time, Selina smiled for her daughter, clapped, took videos, encouraged her, and each time, when they got home and Adrian wasn't there, she would say, "Daddy's working hard. He loves you very much." It was the truth, in part, but it was also a truth stretched so thin it began to fray. Adrian saw himself as a provider, a builder of their future. But what he couldn't see was that he was building something they no longer felt part of. Selina began keeping her voice low during their conversations. Not cold, just careful, as if each word was now measured, filtered, weighed. There were no fights, no raised voices, just the sound of someone slowly giving up. One evening, after a long day of back-to-back meetings, Adrian returned home to a quiet apartment. Selina was in the kitchen, drying dishes. Claire had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching a handmade card. He picked it up. On the front was a drawing of a man in a suit and a little girl holding his hand. Inside, in big, uneven letters, it said, "I miss you even when you're here." Adrian stared at the card longer than he meant to. Selina didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The silence spoke for both of them. He told himself he'd try harder, take a few days off, be more present. But the world didn't slow down, and neither did he. The breaking point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly, in a moment that would burn itself into memory forever. The messages had started out professional. A junior consultant, bright, eager, always available. They worked closely on a deal that stretched late into nights. At first, it was just emails, then meetings, then dinners. Adrian told himself it was harmless, that this was how business worked. Long hours, shared pressure, celebration after success. But proximity is a quiet thief. It doesn't knock on the door or declare its intentions. It just lingers, until a line is crossed so softly that it feels like a whisper instead of a blow. There was no scandal, no headlines, just a moment in a hotel room in another city, one poor decision, made in exhaustion and ego. Adrian didn't love her. He didn't even truly want her. What he wanted deep down was something to numb what he didn't want to feel. When it was over, he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. He felt nothing, no thrill, no satisfaction, just an emptiness made deeper by his silence. He told no one, not even himself. He came home as if nothing had happened, kissed Claire goodnight, asked Selina how her day was. She smiled, the way people smile when they've learned not to expect much. But what Adrian didn't know was that Selina had already begun to notice the change. Not in his schedule, not in his tone, in his eyes. They no longer held her the way they used to. He looked at her the way he looked at a painting in a hallway, familiar, comforting, but no longer truly seen. She didn't need proof. Her heart felt it before her mind accepted it. Weeks passed. The distance widened, and then, one evening, Selina stood in the doorway of their bedroom, suitcase by her side, Claire already asleep in her room. Adrian looked up from his laptop, caught off guard. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low, unsure. "I'm leaving," she said simply, not coldly, just, finally. He stood up, stunned. "Wait, what are you talking about?" "I've already talked to a lawyer," she said. "I'm not here to argue. I just came to let you know in person." "Selina." He stepped toward her. She didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. Instead, she said the words that would live in him forever. "You may build empires, Adrian, but you've destroyed your home." And with that, she turned away, her shoulders straight, her hand tightening on the suitcase handle. Adrian followed her down the hallway, unsure of what to say. His mouth moved, but his words kept falling apart before they could take shape. "Selina, please, can we talk?" She paused by the door but didn't turn around. "You've had years to talk. I've spent years hoping you would." He reached for her hand. She gently stepped aside. From the hallway, Claire appeared, rubbing her eyes, holding a stuffed bear by its worn arm. "Mommy, where are we going?" Selina knelt and whispered, "Just for a little while, sweetheart." Adrian dropped to one knee, opening his arms. "Come here, baby." Claire hesitated, then walked over slowly and wrapped her small arms around his neck. He held her tighter than he ever had, her breath warm on his shoulder, her heart beating fast. "I love you," he whispered, his voice cracking. She pulled back and looked him in the eyes. "Are you coming too?" He didn't answer, and that silence was its own kind of betrayal. Selina gently reached out, taking Claire's hand. "Say goodbye, sweetheart." Claire turned as they stepped through the doorway. Her little feet crossed the threshold, her tiny hand gripping her mother's. And just before the door closed behind them, she looked back. It was only for a second, but that second would live in Adrian's memory forever. There was no anger in her eyes, no tears, just quiet confusion, the kind that comes from not understanding why the person you love the most keeps choosing everything else. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the sound of something breaking in a way that couldn't be undone. Adrian stood frozen in the hallway. The air around him felt heavier, the walls closer. The weight pressing against his chest wasn't panic, it was realization. Everything he thought he could fix later had already left. He moved slowly back to the living room, the stuffed bear still lying on the floor. He picked it up, held it against his chest, and sat down without turning the lights on. There were no calls that night, no meetings, no messages, just a man with everything, sitting in the dark, holding what was left. Have you ever felt the sting of regret? Have you lost something or someone because you didn't see what was slipping away? If you've ever been through something like this, share your story in the comments. Someone else might need to hear it today. In the months that followed Selina's departure, Adrian did what he knew best. He worked. He filled every empty hour with tasks, meetings, contracts, travel, new ventures. If there was a minute left unclaimed, he buried it beneath schedules and productivity. He told himself it was necessary, that growth required sacrifice, that the pain would ease if he just kept moving. But it didn't ease. It hid. Beneath calendar invites, beneath business class flights, beneath the endless applause of people who only knew his name, not his story. The truth was, Adrian wasn't rebuilding. He was running. And the thing about running is this: you can outpace everyone but yourself. His team noticed a shift. He was sharper, less patient, more demanding. He didn't snap, didn't shout, but the warmth that once made people feel like they were building something with him began to disappear. Now they worked for him. He started staying later than ever at the office. The penthouse no longer felt like a home, not that it ever truly had. So he remained in glass-walled meeting rooms long after the cleaners left. drafting emails, reviewing numbers, reading articles he didn't care about. Even the silence in those rooms began to feel like a familiar companion. He'd sit at the head of his long conference table, lights low, the skyline stretching out before him, bright, cold, unreachable. His reflection hovered in the windows like a faded version of himself. Eyes tired, shoulders heavier. He had become the kind of man who got everything done, and no longer knew why he was doing it. Birthdays came. Holidays passed. Each one marked on a calendar by an assistant, each one ignored by choice. He couldn't face them, not because he was busy, but because he didn't know what he'd say if he called. What could he possibly offer that didn't feel like too little, too late? He tried to stay connected. At first, in small ways. Letters, cards, packages. He sent Claire a bracelet engraved with her initials, a box of children's books from one of the countries he had just visited, a soft blanket embroidered with stars, notes signed, "Love, Dad." He never knew if she liked them, never got a thank you in her handwriting. Sometimes, Selina would reply. Brief messages. Civil, measured. "Thank you for the package. She's doing well." Claire started piano lessons. She won first place at her school's science fair. They weren't cold, but they weren't open either. The warmth had faded, replaced by politeness, a distance that felt intentional. Adrian never asked for more. He didn't feel entitled to more. He kept every message, reread them, memorized them. In the quiet hours, he would scroll through them like someone studying, a language they once spoke fluently but could no longer understand. Birthdays were the hardest. He never missed them. His assistant marked them a month in advance. Each year he tried something new, a different gift, a different message. One year, he sent her a video. It took him over an hour to record just 40 seconds. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what she needed to hear, or what she still believed. In the end, he kept it simple. "I'm proud of you. I think about you every day. I'm sorry for everything I missed." He never heard back, but he kept sending gifts, because it was the only way he knew how to stay present in a life he was no longer part of. He found himself checking her school's website from time to time. Public recital schedules, awards announcements, honor roll listings. Every time her name appeared, he felt a strange combination of joy and sorrow. Joy that she was thriving. Sorrow that her success had grown in soil he never helped water. He saw photos once, tagged by someone else, shared publicly. Claire standing with her classmates, smiling wide, holding a certificate. She looked older, taller, her hair different. The child he remembered had become a person he no longer recognized. And that truth stung in a quiet, permanent way. Adrian never reached out directly, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't believe he had the right. Selina never blocked him, but she never invited him in either. It was as if he had been placed behind a glass wall, close enough to see, too far to touch. He told himself he was just passing through the neighborhood, that the board meeting nearby had ended early, that traffic was too heavy to turn back, that stopping by the park didn't mean anything. But none of that was true. Adrian parked across the street and waited, hands clasped, heart uncertain. He hadn't seen them in years, not in person, not outside of a photo or a message or a blurry video passed along by someone who didn't know better. Then, just as the sun slipped lower, they arrived. Selina, walking slowly, carrying a folded blanket. Claire, no longer the toddler he remembered, but a young girl with posture and poise, still carrying a lightness in her step. She laughed as they found a spot near the trees, flopped down onto the grass, pulled snacks from a bag. Nothing special, but to Adrian, it was everything. He watched from the car. Claire stretched out across the blanket, head in Selina's lap, pointing at the clouds, gesturing with her hands as she told a story. Selina smiled, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. That small moment, quiet, uneventful, pure, hit harder than any confrontation could have. This was their life now, and he wasn't part of it. He didn't move, didn't get out, just watched, because deep down he knew showing up uninvited wouldn't fix anything. It would only steal from them a peace they had earned without him. There were other moments like this, too. Once at a recital, he stood in the back, hidden near the exit, coat collar turned up, sunglasses on even indoors. He didn't expect to speak to anyone. He just needed to hear her voice. Claire walked onto the stage, her instrument in hand. He recognized the way she carried herself, determined, focused, calm under pressure. She played beautifully. The audience clapped. Selina stood and smiled, hands together, proud. Adrian clapped too, quietly, hidden in shadow. And as Claire walked off stage for a brief second, she glanced toward the back. He froze. But she didn't stop. Her gaze moved past him. No recognition, just a glance. He wasn't sure if she saw him or saw through him. Either way, it confirmed what he already knew. He was no longer in her life. He was around it, near enough to ache, far enough to be forgotten. Later that night, back in his penthouse, he stared out the window. The skyline was beautiful, but it meant less now. Just glass and height, just lights and outlines. He placed his hand against the cold surface. The reflection stared back, silent and still. He remembered holding Claire the night she was born, the weight of her in his arms, the way she gripped his finger with her whole hand, the promise he made to never let her down. And now, years later, all he had left was distance. Not punishment, not bitterness, just the natural consequence of absence. And he wondered, for the 1,000th time, if there was a path back. It was a Thursday, ordinary by all appearances. Adrian had spent most of the morning reviewing reports, half listening during calls, moving through his day like a man going through practiced motions. He was tired, not from lack of rest, but from the sameness of it all. The numbers changed, but nothing else did. The decisions, the routines, the people, they rotated like clock hands, steady but soulless. His assistant, Jordan, knocked once on the glass door of his office. "There's someone downstairs asking to see you," Jordan said. No appointment, but she asked not to be announced. Adrian didn't look up. "A journalist?" "No, sir." "An investor?" "No." A pause. "She said her name is Selina." Adrian stopped breathing. His hand, still hovering over a digital document, fell to the table. The screen blurred before his eyes. "What did you say?" "Selina," Jordan repeated. "She's in the lobby. She didn't want to come up until she knew you'd see her." Adrian stood so quickly his chair rolled back and tapped the wall behind him. "Don't make her wait," he said, already heading for the elevator. "Tell her I'm coming down." The ride to the lobby felt longer than it ever had. His fingers fidgeted with the cuff of his shirt. His heart, once so composed, now pounded with the uncertainty of a man about to confront the past he never stopped carrying. As the doors opened, he stepped into the marble-floored lobby and scanned the room. And then he saw her, standing near the window, back straight, arms folded loosely across her chest. She wore no expression of anger, no sign of accusation. There was a steadiness to her, a kind of quiet grace that struck him harder than any raised voice could have. Time had passed, yes, but she still carried herself with the calm confidence he remembered. She hadn't come to settle scores. She had come for something else. He took a step forward, and as he did, another figure turned toward him. Claire, no longer a child. She stood beside her mother, taller now, shoulders squared, eyes alert. The softness of childhood had matured into something sharpened by time, strength, clarity, a guarded wisdom. Adrian's breath caught in his chest. She looked like both of them, Selina's posture, his eyes. She looked like someone he had dreamed of more times than he could count, someone he feared might only ever live in those dreams. And now she was standing 10 feet away. For a moment, no one moved. The sounds of the lobby, distant voices, phones ringing, footsteps across stone, faded beneath the weight of something far more powerful than noise, recognition. Adrian felt every second that had passed since he last saw them, not just in memory, but in his body. In the tightness of his chest, the sudden heat behind his eyes, the way his feet felt strangely rooted to the ground. Selina looked at him first, fully, directly. There was no bitterness in her face, no pity, but there was distance. A quiet, measured distance, like a shoreline she no longer intended to cross without a reason. Adrian opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. Selina gave a small nod, not to greet, not to forgive, simply to acknowledge that this moment was real. Claire's eyes studied him, not with anger, not even confusion, but caution, curiosity laced with restraint. She didn't shrink away. She didn't smile. She stood with the composure of someone who had learned how to guard herself without hardening completely. Adrian took a step forward, then another. "Hi," he managed, voice lower than he expected. "You're both here." Selina gave a small breath. Not quite a sigh. More like she'd braced for this moment and now it had arrived. He turned his attention to Claire. "You've grown," he said, then stopped himself. It sounded so hollow, so obvious, as if he had any right to speak of what he hadn't witnessed. Claire glanced at Selina, then looked back at him. "We all do," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't open either. Adrian felt something shift inside him. A small collapse. He wanted to reach out, to say 100 things, but all of them felt unworthy, because all of them were late. Selina finally stepped forward, her voice calm and controlled. "We didn't come here by accident," she said. Adrian straightened slightly, heart pounding. "Then why?" She cut him off, not harshly, but with finality. "Not here," she said. "Not in the lobby." Adrian swallowed hard and nodded. "Let's go upstairs," he offered. Selina paused, then turned to Claire, who nodded once. They followed him through the private elevator, the space unusually still. No one spoke. The hum of the floor rising beneath them was the only sound. When the doors opened into his office, Adrian stepped aside, letting them walk in first. Selina scanned the space. The skyline in the distance, the polished shelves, the high ceilings and clean lines. She didn't comment. Claire stood by the window, staring at the city below. Adrian watched them both, two people who used to define his world, now strangers in a space they had never belonged to. He turned, ready to ask, to plead, to begin something he wasn't sure how to name. But Selina spoke first. Her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. "We need to talk." The silence that followed Selina's words was different than before. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't waiting. It was deliberate, like the air itself had paused out of respect for what was about to be said. Adrian gestured toward the leather seating area near the windows. "Please," he said. "Sit." Selina walked slowly, not out of hesitation, but control. She took the end of the couch, folding one leg over the other. Claire remained standing, her arms crossed loosely, eyes scanning the room as though it were part museum, part memory she never owned. Adrian sat across from them, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped together. Not as a businessman, but as someone who didn't know what to do with his own remorse. Selina broke the silence. "I'm not here to reopen anything," she said. "I'm not here to rehash what's already been lived through. I came because of her." She nodded toward Claire without looking away from Adrian. "She's old enough now. She's been asking questions, and whether you're ready or not, she deserves the right to find her own answers." Adrian nodded slowly, his voice rough. "I don't expect anything." Selina gave the faintest smile, not of amusement, but recognition. "For once I believe you." There was a pause. Adrian looked toward his daughter. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I've had years to imagine this, and still, I have nothing that seems good enough." Claire finally spoke. "I didn't come here for perfect words." Her voice was clear, measured, like her mother's, but edged with something uniquely hers. "I just wanted to see your face, hear your voice, see if you still felt like mine." That word, mine, cracked something open inside him. He looked at her properly this time. The curve of her jaw, the stillness in her eyes, the way she wore her independence without apology. "I've missed everything," Adrian said, "and I have no right to ask for anything. But if you're willing to let me be here now, even a little, I'll show up. Every time." Selina glanced at her daughter. Adrian didn't press. He didn't plead. He sat in the discomfort, finally learning how to listen. Claire studied him, then looked away. "I'm not promising anything." "You don't have to," he said. "Just knowing you're here, that's more than I thought I'd ever get." Selina stood, smoothing her skirt. "That's enough for today." Adrian rose as well, instinctively, as if standing might help him hold on to the moment. Selina walked to the elevator and turned to face him one last time. "You don't get to rewrite the past, Adrian, but you might get to add to the future, if you're patient." He nodded, words trapped behind his ribs. Claire stepped in beside her mother. She didn't hug him, didn't speak, but she looked at him one more time. This time it wasn't the same as when she was a child. It wasn't a question. It wasn't goodbye. It was something open-ended. The elevator doors closed, and for the first time in a very long time, Adrian didn't feel like he was living in a conclusion. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something unfinished. The following afternoon, Adrian sat alone in his office, staring at the spot where they had stood. The air still felt different, as if something sacred had moved through and left the atmosphere changed. He didn't know if they would return. He didn't expect it. So when the intercom buzzed the next day and Jordan said, "Selena and Claire are here again," Adrian didn't speak. He just stood, straightened his collar, and whispered, "I'm up." The moment they walked in, he could feel it. This wasn't a reunion. This was something far more honest. Selena didn't sit this time. She remained standing near the edge of the room, eyes steady, voice calm. "Let's be clear about something," she said. "I didn't come here for you. I came for her." Adrian nodded. "I understand. I'm not here to revisit old wounds. I'm here to give Claire space to decide for herself." He turned to his daughter, who stood quietly by the window, just like before. She didn't speak, but she was listening. "I won't ask for more than that," Adrian said. "Whatever you're willing to give, I'll take it." It was the first time in years he'd said something without calculation, without control. Just truth, stripped down, unprotected. Selena sat then, but it wasn't an invitation to relax. It was a signal that the conversation was no longer hers to lead. Claire moved to the center of the room and sat across from him. Adrian looked at her, really looked. She was still so young, and yet her eyes held something beyond her years. She didn't fidget. She didn't shrink. He took a slow breath. "I never expected you to come here." "I didn't come for you either," she replied, echoing her mother. "I came because I had questions, and I was tired of pretending I didn't care about the answers." He nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. There was a pause, long enough to feel like a test. "I don't know you," Claire finally said. Adrian's throat tightened. "I see your name in headlines," she continued. "I know what the world says about you, but none of that tells me who you are, or why you weren't there." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees again, just as he had the day before. "I don't expect you to know me, but I'd give anything to start showing you who I am now." Claire looked at him, measuring not just his words but his tone, his eyes, his posture. She wasn't looking for charm. She was searching for honesty. "I'm not promising anything," she said. "You don't have to," he answered. Selena watched it all without interrupting. She didn't guide the conversation. This wasn't hers to shape anymore. It was Claire's, and she wasn't done yet. The room felt still, not because it was quiet, but because something was coming, and all three of them could feel it. Claire leaned back slightly in her chair, arms folded, her gaze never leaving Adrian. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in discomfort. She spoke with the calm force of someone who had waited years to say the words. "Why did you hurt Mom?" There it was. Not screamed, not sobbed, just asked, straight and plain, the way only truth ever is. Adrian felt the weight of the question before he could find an answer. It landed somewhere between his chest and his gut, knocking something loose inside him. He didn't respond right away, because there was no quick answer, no polished excuse, no explanation that could balance out what he had broken. He looked down at his hands. "I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, he said softly. Claire didn't flinch. She just waited. Adrian took a breath, and this time, when he spoke, his voice was unguarded. "I thought I had time," he began. "I thought that if I worked hard enough, if I built something big enough, it would prove how much I cared. I told myself I was doing it for her, for you, for us." He paused. His throat tightened, but he didn't look away. "But the truth is, it wasn't just about providing, it was about control. It was about wanting to be the best at something, because I didn't feel like I was enough, as I was." Claire's face didn't change, but her eyes softened slightly. "I stopped listening to her," Adrian continued. "I started choosing ambition over presence, over kindness, over love. And the worst part is, I noticed the change. I felt her slipping away. And instead of fixing it, I buried myself deeper." Selena looked down, blinking slowly. But she said nothing. Adrian's voice cracked as he added, "I failed her, not with one mistake, with 1,000 small ones." The words hung in the air. "I didn't cheat because I stopped loving her," he said. "I cheated because I had already stopped seeing her. And once I did that, the damage was done. She gave me years. She gave me space to wake up. And I just kept choosing everything but her." There was no apology that followed. Just silence, heavy but honest. Claire exhaled, then leaned forward. "Why didn't you call more, after we left?" Adrian looked at her. really looked, because I didn't know if I deserved to. This time, something shifted in her. She blinked once, glanced at her mother, then returned her gaze to him. And now? I still don't know, Adrian said, but I'm here anyway. The air between them felt heavier now, but not in the same way it had when they first sat down. It wasn't tension, it was weight, the weight of truth, finally spoken. Claire didn't speak right away. Her eyes had dropped to her hands, fingers tracing over her wrist as if her body needed something to focus on while her mind caught up. Selena looked over at her daughter, studying her face, but she didn't interrupt. She knew Claire needed to find her own response, not be guided to one. Adrian sat quietly across from them. For once, he didn't try to fill the silence. He knew this wasn't a moment for speeches. Claire finally looked up. Her voice was quiet, steady. That was the first honest thing I've ever heard from you. Adrian swallowed. It won't be the last. She tilted her head. Are you here to fix the past? No, he said. I know I can't. Then, why are you here? He leaned forward just slightly, not to persuade, but to show her he meant what he was about to say. To start from wherever you'll let me, even if that's nowhere. Even if I'm just someone you check in with now and then. I'll take that. Claire gave a small nod. We'll see. And somehow, in those two words, there was more hope than he'd had in years. Not forgiveness, not a fresh start, just a door left open. Selena stood slowly. That's enough for today. Adrian nodded in agreement. Claire stood beside her mother. As they turned to leave, Adrian spoke one last time. Thank you for showing up, both of you. Selena glanced back briefly. Just remember, showing up once doesn't fix everything. It's who you are when no one's looking that matters now. He nodded. I understand. They left together, and the door shut softly behind them. Adrian remained seated, the imprint of their presence still lingering in the room. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was performing. He felt like a man who had finally begun telling the truth. Have you ever had to face someone you've hurt? Maybe you didn't know what to say. Or maybe you said everything, and it still wasn't enough. Drop it in the comments. Whether you're the one who hurt or the one who was hurt, someone else might need your story today. That night, long after Selena and Claire had gone, Adrian sat alone in his office. The city blinked below, 1,000 lights dancing across his windows. But he no longer saw opportunity out there. He saw what almost never happened. He pressed his palms together, resting them against his mouth. The silence in the room was sharp, and this time he didn't try to escape it. Because something had hit him in a way it never had before, not during the separation, not during the work, not even during his confession. It was this. What if Selena never returned? The question wasn't poetic. It was visceral. What if her forgiveness had been buried permanently in the rubble of what he broke? What if Claire had never stood in that lobby? What if he had grown old, successful in name only, with no one left to carry his memory with warmth? Would anyone at his firm sit at his funeral and speak of the father he had once been? Would his daughter even come? He pictured the future that almost was, the sterile apartment, the rotating list of assistants, the cold acknowledgement from peers who respected his empire but never knew his heart. He imagined a lifetime of awards gathering dust, of Christmases spent, buying gifts for people he didn't love, of phone calls that never came. He could see it all now. A life of luxury that felt more like a sentence than a reward. A name engraved in stone, and no one crying beside it, and that's when it struck him. Selena returning wasn't just a gift, it was a rescue. She had pulled him back from the edge of a version of himself that would have died admired, but unloved. Not because he wasn't lovable, but because he never showed up to be loved in the first place. He whispered into the stillness, if she hadn't come back, I would have never known how empty I'd become. Adrian rose from his seat, slowly, as if gravity had grown stronger. He walked to the tall windows and pressed a hand against the glass. Out there were the buildings he built, the city he'd conquered, the skyline that had once made him feel immortal. Now, all it did was mock him. He thought about the men he used to admire, powerful, revered, untouchable, men whose lives were profiled in business magazines, whose funerals made headlines, whose legacies were measured in market share. But he saw the hollowness now. All the years he had admired them, he hadn't really seen them. They were statues, sculptures made of achievements, not affection. Not one of them, in all his study, had left behind something soft, something warm. And now he knew why. They had poured everything into their image, and nothing into their people. Adrian took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I won't die that way." He turned away from the window and stared at the picture frame on his desk, still empty, still waiting for a reason to be filled. He sat down and pulled out a pen, not to sign a contract, not to approve a merger. He began to write, to his daughter, not a speech, not a pitch, just truth. "Claire, I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me. But I want you to know that I am finally choosing you, even if you never choose me back. Not because I want a reward, but because you're worth it. You always were." He folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. This wasn't about a grand gesture. It wasn't about winning Selena back. It wasn't even about being called Dad again. It was about becoming a man worthy of being called anything at all. Because if Selena had never returned, if Claire had never stood before him again, the truth is, he might have gone his whole life thinking he hadn't failed. But now, he knew better. And knowing came with responsibility. Adrian didn't wait for the weekend. The next morning, he cleared his entire schedule. No boardroom, no driver, no calls. Just a quiet walk to a local bookstore he hadn't stepped inside in decades. He remembered Selena loved that place. It was where they used to meet on Sunday afternoons, skimming old poetry, books, while Claire played under the reading table with stuffed animals. It felt strange walking through those doors again. The store hadn't changed much, but he had, and the man who entered now wasn't looking for memories. He was looking for guidance. He bought a book on parenting adult children, another on emotional repair, a third on understanding trust after separation. When the cashier scanned them, she glanced up and smiled politely. "Starting over?" she asked, kindly. Adrian nodded. "Trying to." He walked home. No limo, no entourage. That night he cooked, poorly. The pasta was overdone, the sauce too salty. But he plated it and ate every bite at the dining table, not in front of a screen. His phone stayed on silent, turned face down beside the letter to Claire. And then, the most difficult part, he waited. No applause came. No miracle text message arrived. No dramatic moment played out. But something had shifted. For the first time in years, Adrian Cross lived a day without pretending. He was just a man learning how to show up for the people he once left behind. And though the house was still quiet, and though the walls still echoed with all that had been lost, it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like the beginning of a life rebuilt on different terms, a life where success wasn't spoken in headlines, but whispered in the way his daughter might someday say, "He didn't give up on me." Adrian was never late again. Not once. If Claire said she was free at 4, he was parked at 3:45. If she texted him 2 days in advance, he cleared the week. If she mentioned a preference, he remembered, not in a performative way, but in a quiet, reverent way. As if every word she gave him was a thread he couldn't afford to lose again. The shift wasn't loud. He didn't try to impress her with gifts or speeches. Those days were gone. Instead, he listened, truly listened. He asked about her favorite books, her coursework, what music she liked, who she looked up to, what scared her about the future. And when she answered, he didn't try to solve or preach. He simply stayed present, curious, attentive. Sometimes she responded in short, cautious phrases. Other times she opened up for whole minutes at a time. He never pushed either way. He let the pace be hers. One afternoon, after she'd mentioned a small showcase she was preparing for, Adrian showed up. No fanfare, no backstage passes, or business acquaintances tagging along. Just him. Sitting in the middle row, alone, wearing a plain sweater and slacks, hands folded in his lap. As Claire took the stage, he leaned forward with the focus of a man witnessing something sacred. And when she finished, she looked out into the crowd. He stood first, not clapping the loudest, but clapping first. She smiled. Not fully, but enough to mean, "I saw you." At home, the contrast was becoming harder for Selena to ignore. She noticed how Adrian no longer filled conversations with updates about company expansions or milestones. He never once mentioned the boardroom unless she asked. Instead, he talked about Claire, about how thoughtful she was, about how his favorite part of the week was hearing her talk about something she loved. Selena didn't comment, but she listened, and she watched. She saw the subtle changes, The way Adrian paused before speaking now, as if weighing his words with care. The way he deferred when Claire expressed a boundary. The way he asked Selina how she was doing and waited for a real answer. It wasn't a show. She knew him too well. It wasn't guilt either. That had long since burned off. This was something else. A man trying to learn how to love without ego. And it moved her more than any grand apology ever could. Late one evening, after Claire had gone upstairs, the two of them remained at the kitchen table. A half-full teacup sat between them. Selina looked at him, not through him, not around him, but at him. "You really have changed," she said quietly. Adrian looked up, caught off guard. "I'm trying. I see that," she said. She paused, then added, "And maybe that's worth something." He didn't answer. He couldn't. But he nodded. And in that moment, something in his chest released. A pressure he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since the day she walked away. Adrian no longer measured success in headlines or net growth. His new milestones were quieter. A text from Claire that said, "Hey, you free this week?" A shared meal where silence was intense but comfortable. A photo, one she took on her own, of them together at a small cafe, his arm awkwardly resting on the table, her smirk just shy of playful. To anyone else, they were simple moments. But for a man like Adrian, who once lost them all, they were victories that couldn't be priced. He began keeping a small notebook. He never told anyone about it. In it he wrote down everything Claire liked or disliked, not because he wanted to manipulate his way back in, but because he didn't want to forget this time. He jotted down the kind of tea she preferred, the professors she admired, the questions she asked about life. He even started asking her about her mother, carefully, respectfully, wanting to understand the versions of Selina he'd missed during their years apart. Not the woman from memory. The woman now. Selina noticed. She noticed everything. She noticed the way Adrian listened more than he spoke. She noticed he no longer tried to finish her sentences or correct her or justify the past. Instead, he carried it, all of it, and still chose to show up. One afternoon, the three of them found themselves walking through a small local museum. It had once been their favorite kind of weekend escape, back when the family was whole. Now, it was a cautious reunion of routines. Selina moved slowly through the photography exhibit, while Claire disappeared into a sculpture room ahead. Adrian stood beside one black and white image, a woman holding her child, blurred, around the edges, but framed with such raw tenderness it made his chest tighten. Selina came up beside him, quietly. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. After a long pause, she asked, "What do you think you would have done differently, if you had the chance?" He didn't respond right away. He looked at the photo again. Then he said, "I would have shown up when it was inconvenient, when it wasn't easy. I would have stopped trying to build a legacy for her, and just lived one with her." Selina didn't look at him, but she nodded. "I believe you," she said. "Now." That night, as Adrian drove them both home, Selina rested her head lightly against the passenger window. The street lights passed slowly overhead. Neither of them spoke, but the silence, for once, didn't carry distance. It carried peace, not resolution, not restoration, just peace, the kind that only exists when someone finally understands what they almost lost and what they're willing to do to never lose it again. Healing did not arrive as a thunderclap. It came in soft, ordinary ways. A meal shared without tension, a question asked without fear, a laugh exchanged across the table that didn't carry weight from the past. Adrian didn't expect Selina to forget. He didn't even ask her to. What he gave her, and Claire, was consistency. Not words, not promises. Just steady, quiet effort. He learned how to wait. He learned how to leave space. And over time, that space filled with moments that neither of them could have predicted. There was a particular Saturday that stood out. Selina had cooked a simple breakfast. Claire was at a friend's. The kitchen smelled of toast and fresh-cut herbs. Adrian offered to do the dishes. She didn't protest. As he stood by the sink, Selina joined him, not to help, but just to be near. That hadn't happened in years. They talked, softly, about old memories, their daughter's future. Small things that once might have gone unnoticed but now felt like treasures. There was no grand apology. No dramatic declaration. Just a quiet closeness returning like a forgotten tune. They began to take evening walks, nothing elaborate. Just down by the river where trees whispered overhead and the water moved slowly under dimming skies, Claire sometimes joined them, but often walked ahead, earbuds in, leaving her parents to walk side by side in silence. It was during one of those walks that Adrian gently reached for Selena's hand. He didn't squeeze it. He didn't even look at her. But she didn't pull away. She let it stay, not out of obligation, not out of nostalgia, but because in that moment it felt okay. Later that same week, they sat in the car after a late-night outing, Claire already inside the house. Adrian stared out through the windshield, fingers loose on the wheel. "I still regret it all," he murmured. "Every single part of it, every moment I let slip past, every time I chose something else instead of you." Selena didn't interrupt. She let him speak. "I wake up sometimes," he continued, "and I forget where I am. I still expect to walk into a house without warmth, without your voice. I still prepare myself for silence." Finally, he turned to her. "And then I realize, you're here, even if only halfway, even if not fully. You're here." He paused. "But I know you don't owe me anything." Selena exhaled. The weight of years hung in the pause between them. She looked at him with clear, unflinching eyes. "Then spend the rest of your life proving it was never too late." That was the turning point, not a finish line, but a fork in the road. From that night forward, Adrian stopped measuring progress by how close he was to forgiveness. Instead, he measured it by how much trust he could rebuild, slowly, deliberately. The weeks that followed felt different. The wounds were still there, visible in pauses, in uncertain glances, but the pain no longer governed the air between them. Selena no longer waited for Adrian to fail. Adrian no longer overcompensated with performance. Instead, they both leaned into simplicity. She would invite him over for dinner, not out of duty, but because she wanted to see how he showed up when no one else was watching. And Adrian, he learned how to leave space for her voice. He asked questions without expecting praise. He listened not to solve, but to understand. Sometimes they'd sit at the kitchen table after Claire had gone to bed. Two people who had once shared everything, now learning how to share again, not the past, but the now. One evening, Selena told him about her garden, a project she had started the year after she left. "It was the only thing that helped me breathe back then," she said, folding her hands. "I used to think, if I can grow something again, maybe I can grow back parts of myself." Adrian looked at her, really looked, and said, "I'm glad you did. I'm sorry I made you have to." Selena's eyes softened. She didn't speak right away, but in the way she exhaled, there was a release, small but real. As Claire watched them from a distance, she noticed the difference too. Her father, the man once locked behind office glass and empty excuses, was now present at recitals, present in conversations, present even when nothing exciting was happening. He helped her move dorm furniture, stayed quiet when she was frustrated, and always asked before offering advice. One evening, Claire said to him as they drove back from dinner, "You're different, not just with Mom, with me." Adrian smiled faintly. "I'm trying to be better than I was. I know I can't go back and fix it all, but maybe I can be the kind of man now that I wish I had been then." She didn't say anything for a while, just looked out the window. Then she said quietly, "You're getting there." It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, moments where silence fell too quickly, or past pain leaked into present tension. But now, they had something they hadn't had before, willingness. Willingness to stay in the room. Willingness to hold space. Willingness to believe that love could be rebuilt, one honest moment at a time. On an early spring afternoon, the three of them found themselves at the river once again. The air was cool, the sky soft. Claire walked ahead, phone in hand. Selena and Adrian followed, their steps slow, their conversation easy. They stopped near the same bench they had visited months before. Adrian reached for Selena's hand again, but this time, she reached for his first. Not as a symbol, not as a decision, but as a choice. A moment, a beginning. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that people can change, not through words but through presence and perseverance, tap the like button. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where growth, healing, and redemption take center stage. The stage was lit, but Adrian didn't feel the usual thrill of prestige. The auditorium was filled with business leaders, aspiring entrepreneurs, and young professionals hungry for insight. He had once known exactly what to say to them: numbers, strategy, market trends, vision boards. But now his voice had changed. Not the tone, but the truth behind it. He stepped up to the podium, a tall glass of water by his side. The lights above felt warm, not blinding. In the front row, Claire sat with her chin resting on her hand. Selena sat beside her, not as a trophy, not as a symbol, but as someone who had chosen to stay. Adrian looked out across the room, then down at his notes, then away from them entirely. He began. There was a time when I measured my worth by profit margins and stock value. There was a time when I believed success was a place, a high floor with a view of the world, looking down. I was wrong. I had to lose something sacred to understand what truly matters. You see, anyone can build something impressive, but only a few can build something that lasts beyond them. The room had gone quiet, not the silence of boredom, but of reflection. No one tells you that while you chase the world you love can quietly walk out the door. No one tells you that when you finally sit at the top, what you hear first is your own echo. He paused. Let them absorb that. I used to think legacy was what people said about you after you were gone. Now I understand. Legacy is what lives in the hearts of those you still have time to love. The applause would come later, warm and sustained. But Adrian barely noticed. Because when he stepped off that stage, he didn't care about the standing ovation. He cared about the smile Selena gave him, proud, steady. He cared about the way Claire hugged him after, whispering, "That was the first time I've seen you talk about real things." He cared because, for once, his words matched his life. Home had changed, too. The penthouse still had the glass walls, the polished floors, the sleek furniture. But now it held something richer. Movement. Laughter spilled from the kitchen. Claire sometimes brought friends home. Selena played music while cooking, asking Adrian to help chop vegetables even though he was still terrible at it. There were family photos now, not stiff portraits, but real moments. A snapshot of Claire sneezing mid-laugh. One of Selena squinting at the sun. Adrian with flour on his face from a failed baking experiment. They weren't perfect. They never would be, but they were present. They were whole in ways that numbers could never measure. One late evening, Adrian found himself again standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same view he once stared out of with a drink in his hand and nothing in his heart. But tonight, he wasn't alone. Selena came up behind him, gently rested her chin on his shoulder. "Still thinking?" she asked softly. "Always," he said. "But it's different now." She didn't need to ask how. She could feel it in his stillness. He turned slightly toward the glass. Where once he saw only his own reflection, now he saw their daughter in the hallway behind him, brushing her teeth, humming something off-key. He saw Selena's warmth in the kitchen light, the living things that filled the corners of a space that used to feel so sterile. The skyline hadn't changed, but he had. For the first time in decades, he wasn't trying to escape that reflection. He was thankful for it. He didn't try to erase his regrets. He learned to walk with them. They were part of him now, like old scars that no longer ached, but reminded. He had once believed he was building an empire. Now he understood what he was really building was a legacy, not in company reports or quarterly earnings, but in the way Claire trusted him enough to share her fears, in the way Selena let her guard down, inch by inch, in the way he showed up without needing praise, because love no longer had a scoreboard. Adrian Cross, the man the world once applauded for business acumen, had finally become something far rarer, a man who could repair, a man who learned how to love after nearly losing the chance to. His biggest regret would always remain. But because she returned, because she chose to return, he was given something rarer than gold, a second chance. And this time, he held it like it was sacred, because it was.